Hi and welcome back for another CottageCutz video tutorial. This is Marla with Mad About Cards and Crafts, and today I'm creating this beautiful winter birthday card. This card is unisex, so it's good for either a male or a female. These are the two dies that I used. Both are available in the Scrap and Cottage. I'll have them linked in the description box below. I started with the Winter Pine and Birch, which was from the winter release in December, and then from the October release, I'm using a deer on the Woodland Christmas Set. I do color the deer off camera just to save a little bit of time. I did want to share the coloring for the pine and the birch trees. These pine and birch tree, this die is a giveaway, so I will have the information on how you can win this particular die later on in my video. I showed you the colors that I was using with my Copic marker. As you can see, I am doing a flicking motion. I colored both trees just a little bit differently, and I think that they came out pretty similar. I just wanted to see if I was going to get a different look by coloring them differently. I started with my darkest color, which was a G46, and I blended that out with a G43. Then I added a little bit of that G46 to the left and the right side where the trunk would be, because the inside of those branches are going to be a little bit darker because the sun is not really peeking through. I added a little bit of E29 to the left and the right side of the trunk, and also down the center with an E27. Because a pine tree will have branches, I typically don't add this, and I thought I would add it to this pine tree, and I absolutely loved the effect. So I did take the E27 and I flicked that all the way across the branches to make sure that I had that trunk, or not the trunk, I had the little brown from the branches, and then I went over it again with my G46, my G43. I added that G40 from the outside in, which was my lightest color. I'm taking that G40 again, I'm going over each of the branches, both on the top side of the branch and the bottom, just to get rid of that white and to add a little bit more depth to my die cut, and I love the way this turned out. For tree number 2, I'm going to start with my darkest marker again, which is that G46, but this time I'm going straight in with my E29, and then I blend it out with my E27. Using that E27 again, I am using a flicking motion, and I'm adding those branches. I'm going to blend it out this time, starting with my lightest, which is going to be my G40. And I'm just going over that white space, and then I'll bring in my mid-tone, which is going to be my G43, and then I'll finish it off with a little bit of depth with the G46, so my darkest color. And I like the way that this turned out, and you see, you do not have to be a colorist to be able to get this depth. I very loosely colored and scribbled on this, and I think that these are some of my favorite pine trees. I really like how the branches are all separated, and once I start adding a little bit more to those branches, you're going to see how lively these trees are. They do, the die does come with some birch trees, and that's what I'm coloring right there. I started with a W2 and a W0, but I felt like I needed a little bit more depth, so I'm adding some lines using my W5 marker, and then I'm going to blend it out with the W0 again. I wanted to mention that these dies do add a little bit of embossing to those birch trees, so there is texture on the trees, which is something that I always appreciate about the CottageCutz dies. Here's what I was talking about adding some life to these trees. This is a winter scene, and it wouldn't be winter in the mountains without snow. I'm using gouache. If you're not familiar with gouache, gouache is in between an acrylic paint and a watercolor. It's in the watercolor family. It's more opaque, like an acrylic paint would be. So if by not adding water to this, you notice that I am really getting a nice texture on each of the branches. It would wash out if I chose to add water to this. So having the ability to have that opacity and not the translucent look of watercolors really adds that texture. So it kind of has that painting acrylic texture going straight from the tube. So I just squirted a little bit from the tube onto that little stamp tool, and then I added just a tiny bit of water to my brush so that I would get a little bit more movement. I did cut this stencil out. I created this stencil myself using a die from my stash and some Duralar paper. The Duralar is nice for cutting stencils. So like for my silhouette cameo, when I want to cut out stencils on my own, I do use that Duralar. I wanted a hillside. I wanted to mask off the bottom portion of this so that I could create my sky. As you can see, I did start with salvage patina. I'm blending in some prize ribbon. You might be thinking, wow, those two colors don't go together well, but I'm going to add some of the broken china over the top to get a little bit better of a blend. I wanted a little bit darker at the top and lighter towards the bottom. I'll blend out with the salvage patina again, and then I'll clean off my work surface, come back in with a little bit more broken china, and I love the way it turned out. To add that oxidation, because I did use Distress Oxides, I spritzed a little bit of water into the palm of my hand, and then I like the size of the droplets that I get when I clap my hands over my project. So I clapped my hands, and then I'm going to use my heat tool to dry, and you can see how beautiful that background is. Now I'm going to, what looks like, mess this up, but I'm really not. So I have the reverse side of the mask that cut off, and I'm just using that to protect my sky. I have a finger dauber and some weathered wood Distress Oxide. I'm just tapping that onto the edge of my snow because I did want a little bit of shadowing, but fear not, I'm going to come back in with that gouache, and as I mentioned, that gouache is a little bit more opaque, so that gouache is going to smooth out that gray while still allowing me to have that shadowing. I'm going to add 4 of the trees. I do add a 5th tree in a little bit. You'll notice that I'm staggering my trees, so one tree is higher than the other. I'm not lining them up in a perfect row. I do want to have that change in elevation for each of the trees. The birch trees are going to go on the right, and then of course you can see that the pine trees are on the left. At this point, I really wasn't sure that I was going to use the deer. I thought that I might just create the scene without any animals, but I did end up coming back in and deciding that it needed just a little more something to complete the card. This is a stamp from my stash. It does say happy birthday. I wanted to make sure that I could see this really well and make sure that I got a good impression. So I am adding my anti-static powder to make sure that I don't get any of that stray embossing powder anywhere else on my card front. And I'm using Versamark ink. VersaFine ink. So I have VersaFine Onyx Black ink, which will allow me to emboss. I'm going to use a little bit of silver embossing powder on this. I thought the silver was the perfect color for all the cool tones that I did use on the front panel. Once I get that powder on, I'll use my Wagner heat tool to melt that. And as you can see, I need a little bit more, but first I'm going to add that little bit of gouache and see how it's softening up those snowy edges. Not only that, but if you see the card in person, you actually see a little bit of texture from that gouache. So having a little bit of white gouache is really helpful, especially when you're completing winter cards. There's that final tree. I wasn't sure. I didn't like that it looked like it was like completely even, adding it to the right side of the card, so I thought that it fit better flanked on the left side. And then I needed to add a little bit of that gouache to that tree because I didn't do it when I colored it. Once I finish with this, I am going to add some splatters, and I just added a little bit more water and I'm tapping it with my brush. While I'm doing that, I do want to announce that the winner of my last giveaway was My Crafting World Anna. Your name is up on the screen. I will have Mary Marsh's email linked in the description box below. Email her. She'll make sure that you get that winter chalet die. If you would like to win the winter pine and birch trees, all you need to do is be a subscriber, leave a comment, like the video, and that's all that you need to do in order to enter for a chance to win that die. While I was chatting, you'll notice that I did go ahead and add my deer. I colored it off screen as I mentioned before. I'm using that same gouache to lighten up the Copic marker that I added to the bottom of the feet. I added that Copic marker so that it would give a little bit of shadowing. I have a black mat. This mat is cut down to 8.5 by 3.5 inches. I'm going to center this onto that black mat. When I'm finished with that, I do have a top folding teal card panel that is cut to 8.5 by 3.5. No, 8 3/4 by 3 3/4. Sorry about that. I'm going to add some of that glue to the back to make sure that I get it adhered nice and strong. And that will complete my card for today. So I want to thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to enter for the giveaway. Leave a comment, like the video, make sure you're a subscriber. Until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day. Thanks so much for watching.